In the annals of criminal history, there are individuals whose cruelty goes far beyond the pale of ordinary evil, whose deeds are so depraved and merciless that they can only be described as the manifestation of an absolute monster in human flesh. The story that follows is about such monsters, hiding behind a mask of normalcy. In the world, there are souls whose innate kindness and light prevent them from remaining indifferent to the plight of others. As a rule, such responsiveness earns them the respect and admiration of those around them. However, sometimes it is this very openness and compassion that becomes a fatal vulnerability, opening the door of their lives to the most dangerous and ruthless elements of society. Mavis Nelson, a member of the indigenous population of the United States, spent her life on the Yakima Reservation, located in the state of Washington. This vast territory, spanning 1,300,000 acres, was home to more than 30,000 Native Americans. It was here that she was born and spent her formative years. Her life's path, like that of many of her fellow tribespeople, was fraught with hardship from the start. But this did not harden her heart. On the contrary, she managed to preserve a remarkable kindness and light within herself. Those around her remembered her as a woman of inexhaustible positivity, pleasant to be with, and ready to give the very shirt off her back to a complete stranger. The Nelson family was large and close-knit, but Mavis formed the strongest and warmest bond with her older sister, Ernestine Owl. Their close relationship endured throughout their lives. Ernestine, more than anyone, knew and cherished her sister's good nature and cheerful spirit. Upon reaching the age of about 50, the heroine of this story decided to leave the reservation and move to the metropolis. After her mother's death, with her sister and other relatives remaining in Yakima, Mavis settled in Seattle. There, she found a job as an administrator in a residential complex, managed by an organization that helped people in difficult life situations with temporary housing. Her work was akin to volunteering. In her new city, she quickly earned a reputation as a person with a big heart, as she often let people she barely knew stay temporarily in her rented apartment if they had absolutely nowhere else to go. Mavis simply did not know how to refuse help, ignoring all warnings that such openness could lead to disaster. Despite this, she always remained a strong-willed and independent person. Alas, her boundless trust and naivete carried a deadly threat. In May of 2022, Mavis, who was 56 at the time, continued her work, remaining the same responsive and kind-hearted woman. But at the end of the month, something inexplicable happened. She vanished. There were no apparent preceding reasons. She simply stopped communicating. For her family, and especially for her older sister, this news was a devastating blow, as Mavis maintained almost daily contact with someone in the family, even if just for a short chat. They were all aware of the tragic statistics in the United States concerning the disappearance of indigenous people, particularly women. They go missing at a rate 4 times higher than white American women, and the chances of finding them alive are significantly lower. Law enforcement agencies almost always dedicate fewer resources and less attention to such cases, and those responsible for their abduction, assault, or murder often receive lighter sentences or escape justice altogether. When Mavis's family contacted the police, they were met with a predictable reaction: icy indifference. At first, the officers didn't even want to accept their report, claiming that an adult woman has the right to go wherever she pleases without informing anyone. Then, they were told they had to wait 2 days before a person could be officially declared a missing person. Only after this period did the police show some interest in the case. This was largely possible thanks to the tireless efforts of Ernestine, who practically had to force the authorities to act. By then, Mavis's entire family, friends, and colleagues were consumed with anxiety. Endless attempts to call her or reach her through social media were unsuccessful. This behavior was completely out of character for her. Furthermore, she hadn't shown up for work in several days, which was unthinkable for someone as responsible as Mavis. She would never abandon her duties without notice and a valid reason. Ernestine Owl showed incredible persistence in her efforts to break the stalemate of police inaction and start the search for her younger sister. There was a moment when even she began to lose hope of ever learning her loved one's fate. But the Nelson family's persistence was rewarded. An experienced detective from the Seattle Police Department, Josh Rui, was assigned to the case. For him, this was his first experience investigating the disappearance of an indigenous person in the U.S. From the very beginning, the detective was deeply moved by Ernestine's anguish. Her persistence, eloquence, and unwavering conviction that something terrible had happened to Mavis made a strong impression on him. He would later recall that Ernestine acted as if she intuitively knew about the tragedy and no longer hoped to see her sister alive. The relatives informed the detective that Mavis lived in a small studio apartment in Seattle, and once again mentioned her habit of helping anyone in need, even letting people she barely knew stay the night. This fact raised serious concerns. Her loved ones had repeatedly begged Mavis to stop this risky form of volunteering, but she remained adamant. The woman's fate remained unknown, and there were still no grounds to obtain a search warrant for her residence. Mavis's family actively cooperated with the police, sharing any information in the hope of aiding the search. They told them that Mavis was in a relationship but was not married and had no children. Her relationship with her partner was unstable. They would get together for a few days, then live apart again. No one in her circle could imagine anyone wishing her harm, as she was known for her exceptional kindness, which at times bordered on naivete. The search dragged on for weeks with no significant results. The worst fears of Ernestine and the entire family began to materialize. The law enforcement officers themselves no longer expected to find Mavis alive, as too much time had passed. The critical 48-hour period had long since expired. There were no calls from her phone, her bank cards were not used, and there was no online activity. And yet, Detective Josh Rui did not stop the investigation. Nearly a month later, on June 20th, 2022, the situation changed dramatically. A concerned citizen called the emergency services in a suburb of Seattle. While walking on a path near a road, he came across a suspicious trash bag from which an unbearable cadaverous smell emanated. Deciding to look inside, he saw what appeared to be human remains and immediately called for help. The police arrived and cordoned off the area. In a ravine by the road, they found 3 black bags that, by all appearances, had been thrown from an overpass above. One of the bags had torn open from the impact of the fall. Inside, police found human organs. The other 2 bags contained the rest of the body, limbs, a head, and a torso. All findings were sent for forensic examination. The experts confirmed that the person's death was violent. Initial information was scarce. They could only determine the gender, female, and approximate age, between 50 and 60. There was no identification with the remains. The degree of decomposition was significant, indicating that the body had been in the bags for a long time. Notably, the number of insects was small, which led to the conclusion that the victim had been kept indoors for a long time, and her remains had only recently been discarded. The examination revealed signs of insect activity from a month ago, as well as fresh larvae that had appeared no more than a day ago. The cause of death was determined to be multiple stab and slash wounds, concentrated mainly in the neck, head, and upper torso. There were also defensive wounds on her hands. The exact number of blows could not be determined due to the state of the body, but there were dozens. The victim had died from blood loss, and her body was dismembered much later. Furthermore, there were signs of repeated sexual assault. committed post-mortem. It became clear that the victim had fallen into the hands of a monster, possibly acting under the influence of drugs or suffering from a severe mental disorder. This person posed an extreme danger to society and had to be found as soon as possible. Also found in the bags were rubber gloves and a used condom, invaluable pieces of evidence that were presumed to belong to the killer. Fingerprints and DNA samples were found on them. According to the findings, the woman had been dead for more than 2 weeks, and her remains had been outdoors for about a day. The location was not chosen randomly. It was a desolate area, far from residential homes and businesses, making the search for witnesses nearly impossible. Cameras on nearby interchanges had not recorded anything suspicious, and the overpass itself was out of view, so the moment the bags were dropped went unnoticed. The victim's identity remained a mystery. A key clue was a hummingbird tattoo on the deceased's arm. After the murder was officially confirmed, the police held a press conference, appealing to the public for help and analyzing all missing person cases from the past month. As soon as Ernestine Owl saw the news about the discovery of the unidentified body, she immediately contacted Detective Roy. She had already told him about her sister's tattoo, but decided to remind him again. The detective, whose precinct was not directly handling the case, was not aware of the details of the discovery. After the call, he went with Ernestine for an identification. She was only shown a photograph of the tattoo to spare her the sight of the body's horrific condition. Without hesitation, Ernestine confirmed that it was her sister's tattoo. A DNA analysis definitively confirmed that the remains found belonged to the missing Mavis Nelson. All timelines matched. Despite the breakthrough, it remained unclear what had actually happened. Detective Josh Rui threw himself into the case with renewed energy. He took this case very personally, partly because of his belief in the system's injustice towards Native Americans. He was appalled by the unimaginable cruelty inflicted upon the victim. The murder itself was monstrous, and the subsequent desecration of the body was an act of absolute inhumanity. The primary theory became hatred, either towards Mavis herself or towards Native Americans in general. The perpetrator was likely someone she knew. Conversations with her loved ones continued. Her older sister revealed that Mavis's personal life had been complicated. Although she was in an unstable relationship with a man from a neighboring town at the time of her death, he was described as quiet and incapable of such savagery. And yet, a lead emerged. Ernestine recalled that a month before the tragedy, her sister had visited her partner in the city of Auburn, where they had a serious argument, after which Mavis decided to break up with him. Ernestine provided the detective with all the information she knew. Arriving in Auburn, Josh Roy questioned the neighbors. Several people confirmed that Mavis had visited and had disappeared the next day. The investigation seemed to be on the right track, and the victim's boyfriend became the prime suspect. The neighbors also remembered hearing screams from his apartment on the day of her arrival, but the noise quickly subsided. Local police confirmed that a call about a domestic dispute had been logged that day. The responding officers had calmed the couple down, after which Mavis stated that she was leaving for Seattle and refused to file a report. She called a taxi and left. Detective Roy met with this man. He said that he had had too much to drink that evening and had a major fight with Mavis, after which she left, announcing their breakup. Once sober, he had tried in vain to contact her to apologize, and eventually concluded that she simply didn't want to see him. During the interview, he was calm, cooperative with the investigation, and, upon learning of her death, could not hold back his tears. His alibi was confirmed, and there was nothing to charge him with. After collecting DNA and fingerprint samples, he was ruled out as a suspect. Detective Roy obtained a search warrant for Mavis's apartment, suspecting that the conflict might have continued there. Inside the apartment, empty beer cans were found, which was strange, as Mavis, according to her sister, did not drink beer and was very tidy. This indicated the presence of a stranger shortly before her disappearance. Although there were no fingerprints on the remains due to the gloves, prints could have been left on the gloves themselves, the condom, and the cans found. The analysis showed that this evidence was not related to her ex-boyfriend. For further investigation, Josh Rui involved other agencies, including the FBI. An analysis of Mavis's phone calls on the day of her death provided a new, decisive lead. The same number appeared repeatedly in her call log on the night she returned from Auburn. Notably, after her disappearance, calls from this number ceased, while all her other friends and relatives began calling more frequently. This suggested that the owner of the number knew Mavis would no longer answer. The number did not belong to any of the witnesses interviewed. After obtaining a warrant, the detective identified the owner, a young man named Charles Becker. He immediately became the prime suspect, as he already had a criminal record. In 2015, he was convicted in the death of his 4-month-old son, who had suffocated after swallowing a piece of a plastic bag. Although the death was ruled an accident, the father was charged with involuntary manslaughter and, in 2016, received a lenient sentence, just 2 years in prison. The detective met with the 33-year-old Charles. He was wary, but expressed sympathy for the victim's family. He confirmed that he knew Mavis, as he had worked at the same organization for a while. After collecting DNA and fingerprint samples, he was released pending the results of the analysis. The results were conclusive. The DNA from the rubber gloves, the beer cans in the apartment, and the traces on Mavis's body were a perfect match for Charles Becker's samples. Detective Rui later admitted that although he tried to remain objective, almost all leads in the investigation pointed to this man. In early October 2022, Charles Becker was brought in for an interrogation that lasted 9 hours. He quickly confessed to the murder of 56-year-old Mavis Nelson, providing details known only to the perpetrator. However, his testimony was contradictory. He constantly changed his story, obviously trying to downplay his guilt, and even introduced a fictitious accomplice into the narrative. According to his final version, after having consensual sex with Mavis, he had a clouding of his mind and stabbed her to death with a knife. He then kept the body in a closet for nearly 2 weeks. He claimed that he and an accomplice had repeatedly desecrated the body, and when it began to decompose badly, they decided to get rid of it by dismembering it. Becker insisted that his unnamed friend did the dismembering, and he only helped. The detective was convinced that the story about an accomplice was a lie, and that all the atrocities were the work of one man. It turned out that Becker, who had housing problems after his release from prison, had met Mavis at her workplace through mutual acquaintances, seeing her as an opportunity to find a roof over his head. Ernestine was convinced that there was no intimate relationship between her sister and the killer. Mavis, being significantly older, had simply shown him friendly compassion. It is likely that after her fight with her boyfriend, when Charles was persistently calling her, she let him stay the night. The killer himself vaguely remarked during the interrogation that Mavis was too good to him. That kindness proved to be fatal. Mavis Nelson was buried next to her mother and brother at the Black Wolf Cemetery, a burial site for the indigenous people of the Yakima Reservation. The capture of her killer brought relief to the many who knew and loved her. Her friend, Roxanne White, who had known Mavis for 10 years, recalled how she had helped her through a difficult time, sharing food and shelter, even though she herself lived modestly. Like many, Roxanne hoped for the harshest possible sentence. This case once again drew attention to a systemic problem. Many noted that the zeal shown by Detective Rui was the exception rather than the rule. Discussions about the indifference of law enforcement to cases involving Native Americans, the misclassification of victims, and the lack of trust between communities and the police were reignited. Detective Rui, in an effort to build a bridge, personally traveled to the reservation to inform the family of the arrest and discuss the details of the case, earning their deep respect. Thanks to Becker's full confession, the 2023 trial proceeded under a fast-track procedure, sparing the family additional emotional trauma. The killer was sentenced to 34 years in prison for first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and desecration of human remains. The prosecution emphasized that aggravating circumstances, including rape, led to the extended sentence. Detective Rui, who was present at the trial, stated that he did everything in his power to not add to the sad statistics of unsolved cases and to remove a dangerous predator from the streets. Ernestine also came to Seattle to look the man who took her sister's life in the eyes. In her statement to the court, she spoke of the void Mavis left behind, of her kindness, which the killer had exploited in the most monstrous way. "I feel like her voice is speaking through me," she said. Justice was served, but it was important to the family and the community that Mavis's death not be in vain. Their voices were heard. A few weeks after the sentencing, the Washington State Department of Justice announced the creation of a special task force to investigate unsolved cases related to the disappearance and murder of Indigenous people. Thank you for your attention. If you have ideas for future stories, please share them in the comments. See you next time on our channel.